One of the biggest hurdles when you're starting out in photography is figuring out how to post process your shots. It's a process, that's for sure, and we all make mistakes along the way, leaning so hard on the saturation slider that it squeals, turning the contrast up to 11, falling down the HDR rabbit hole where skies look like they're having an existential crisis. We've all been there. But as you learn to process your shots, you begin to understand what all the sliders do. But the why, the reasoning behind each change, can be a lot trickier. Watching someone edit photos on YouTube can show you the how, but not the thought process behind the why. Why bump the contrast? Why dial back the saturation? Why lift the blacks? Here's the secret no one says out loud. The photo itself tells you what to do. You just have to learn to listen. There's a disconnect between understanding what a raw editor does and why we make the changes we do. Sure, we understand that if the skies are blown out, we crank the old highlight slider to the left and pull back detail. But that's just a technical fix. What about the non-technical tweaks that increase or decrease the contrast, saturation, or vibrance, for instance? How do you decide to make those adjustments? I'm sure you've watched hundreds of photographers here on YouTube taking an edit from raw to finished photo and try to follow along with their techniques, but despite your best efforts, you're not achieving the same results. And that's because understanding what buttons to press is only half the equation. The real skill comes from knowing the why behind each adjustment. The answer lies in listening to what the photograph itself is telling you about its mood. The non-technical stylistic changes you make should be guided by this underlying mood, which, interestingly enough, is probably what influenced you to take the photo in the first place. So, enough theory, let's talk application. Here's how to read your photograph and begin to understand which adjustments you should make and why. Without a shadow of a doubt, the most important adjustment that you can make to a photograph to influence its mood is the color temperature. It's for this reason that it's usually best to dial in that color temperature as the first step of post-processing, because it sets the foundation for everything that follows. In fact, neurological research has shown that color temperature associations activate specific brain regions, suggesting they're probably hardwired rather than learned. So, when you dial in a color temperature, you're accessing core regions of your brain and the viewer's brain and saying to them, this photo is chilled or this photo is vibrant. Take this photo of a surfer. Probably felt a bit of a shiver when you looked at it. As you can see, the color temperature has not been tweaked. It's what my old Canon camera metered it at when I took the photo. And while it's hard to make a photo this blue look like a hot day in Alice Springs, increasing the color temperature and boosting the warm tones with the color grading wheels does make it feel less like the Antarctic and more like an autumn day in Australia. But you don't have to use these color temperature settings in a literal sense in order to inform your edits, because color works on a psychological level. Put simply, warm tones suggest energy, passion, and danger, while cool tones suggest calm, serenity, and distance. So if the photograph depicts an energetic seed of some kind, consider boosting the color temperature slightly. And if it's a tranquil scene, consider cooling it a bit. Shift that color temperature slider slightly to the left. Do remember though, that unless the color balance of your photo is seriously out of whack, use subtle changes in color temperature, about 20% either way at most, or it will cease to look natural. Just as the general color temperature can be used to convey a certain mood, so saturation and contrast can as well. And for these alterations, you really should look to the photograph itself to inform your decisions, because leaning on either of these sliders too hard is a good way to end up with an unnatural looking shot. So let's decode these sliders, starting with saturation. High saturation levels convey a sense of power or energy, and they do so for one simple reason. Saturation is the degree of intensity of a color. When you increase the saturation, the difference between RGB values becomes more pronounced, and the dominant channels become more dominant. So if there's a lot of orange in the image, for instance, meaning red would be the dominant RGB value, then increased saturation makes red more dominant. It makes sense, therefore, that if you have a scene in which you wish to convey a less intense mood, then you keep the saturation levels low. The saturation slider is so powerful that often it feels like the only way it can move is to the right, but backing off on the saturation can greatly enhance a sense of calm in a photo. Contrast goes hand in hand with saturation because increased contrast suggests drama, while decreased contrast suggests subtlety. But also, from a technical point of view, when you increase contrast using the contrast slider, you also increase saturation. Side note, you can avoid increasing saturation while increasing contrast by using a tone curve, or alternatively by using clarity or texture sliders instead. The tonal range of a photograph and the varying levels of light within it can be a potent tool for processing the shot to convey the sort of mood you envisioned when you took it. You can see precisely this concept used to great effect in TV shows and movies, where the tonal range is used to make you feel a certain way. Bright images with open shadows suggest openness and clarity. Dark images with crushed shadows suggest mystery or secrecy. If you want to maximize the value of a jump scare, you don't light the room with halogens. Highlighted whites and high-key images suggest purity and simplicity, while muted highlights evoke a vintage feel and a softer, emotional heft. So when you sit down to process your shot, read it. Be clear in your mind about what you want to convey and adjust that tonal range accordingly. Remember, these tweaks come after any changes you have to make. They're the second stage of an edit. Don't be afraid to make changes that seem counterintuitive either, such as moving the black point slider into positive ranges. When I first started editing my raw photos, I nearly always shifted the sliders to the right. Increases for the most part, only the highlight slider ever really moving into negative territory. But if your photographic journey has been anything like mine, then you'll begin to realize that these changes are often counter to the feel of the photograph and help explain why they lack the expected impact. That's particularly true of the detail and texture sliders. I honestly don't think I ever reduced detail in my raw edits for the first few years I was at it, because surely more detail is always better, right? No, I was very wide of the mark, and quite often detail and clarity are the enemy of mood. They reveal everything and leave nothing to the imagination, and when pushed too far, they make photos look horribly unnatural. If you wish to express grit and rawness in your photograph, then texture and clarity can be powerful tools. But if you want a dreamier or more romantic feel, then dial back those sliders. Typically speaking, man-made environments such as cities do benefit from increased textural clarity. The natural environment, when shot wide, definitely benefits from relaxed clarity, but if you're shooting close-up or macro, an increased detail or clarity can work well. One of the most popular effects used by landscape photographers to convey a dreamy mood is the venerable Autumn effect, which uses an advanced softening technique to give photos a filmic, soft focus look. You'll see this effect employed extensively by some of the most successful landscape photographers working today, because excessive detail can be to the detriment of mood. Denoising has come a bloody long way in the last 5 years, thanks to the arrival of automated denoising methods trained using machine learning techniques. This in turn has led to a new wave of pristine and noise-free images that laugh in the face of high ISO pixelization and hotspots. But the denoising, as powerful as it is, often removes the noise and the natural noise signatures of popular camera sensors that give the photos the spark of life, which is one way of saying that grain, whether naturally present in the image or added in post, gives a sense of authenticity, nostalgia, or rawness that may well suit your photograph. Landscape photographs and event photography often benefits from natural grain and manageable levels of noise because they endow photographs with realism. If you're shooting for real estate or commercial product work, then a clean and noise-free image is obviously desirable because it gives a sense of function and precision. When you stop to take your photograph, it's because something catches your eye, some feature, some event, some color, some mood. And it's important to remember that spark, whatever it was, when you sit down with your raw editor to process your shot. Learn to look at the image and it will tell you what changes you need to make in order to bring out that core feature, event, color, or mood. Don't forget, the sliders work both ways. When you're new to post-processing, there's this trap of thinking that pushing every slider to the right automatically makes your photos better. But as I hope I've demonstrated, that is definitely not the case. Try moving those sliders into negative territory, and I think you'll be surprised by the results. Let the photograph lead you to a satisfactory edit. Work to bring out the best in your photograph, not necessarily to enhance it. The best edit probably isn't the one with all the sliders maxed out, but the one that makes viewers say, wow, instead of, whoa. And that will do us for this little look at the art of post-processing. Are you a talented photo whisperer, or are you just starting out on your journey? Do let me know in the comments section below. If you enjoyed this content, then do please give it a like. If you got value from it, consider subscribing to my channel for more photo, video, and drone-related content from me. Remember also to check out my Substack, details below, where I'll be posting a written version of this video. All right, that'll do it for this one, guys. Catch you on the next one. Ta-ta.